My brother told me to sit down and stop embarrassing myself. My mother touched his arm and smiled. My father refilled his glass, and 2 days later, I signed the paperwork on a $28 million penthouse on the 53rd floor of a building in Manhattan, a building my firm had designed every single room of. From the lobby floor tiles to the ceiling fixtures in the presidential suite. They still don't know. Or they didn't, until they did. Let me take you back to the beginning, because the beginning matters more than the ending. The ending is just where the weight finally lands. I grew up in a house in Dallas where the rules were never written down, but everyone understood them perfectly. My brother was 4 years younger than me and had been, since the day he came home from the hospital, the sun around which the rest of us quietly orbited. I don't say that with bitterness. Not anymore. I say it the way you'd describe the weather as a fact that shaped everything, even the things that had nothing to do with it. My mother used to call me her steady one. She meant it as a compliment. I understood early that it wasn't. Being steady meant you didn't need things. Being steady meant your room didn't need repainting. Your school shoes could last another semester. Your disappointments were smaller somehow, easier to set aside. My brother got the new cleats every season. I got the phrase, "You understand, don't you?" Sweetheart so many times it stopped sounding like a question. I was 12 when I started sketching. Nothing serious, just the way some kids doodle in the margins of notebooks, except mine filled entire books. Floor plans, mostly. Rooms I invented, spaces that didn't exist, windows placed exactly where the light would fall right. My grandmother noticed once, the only one who ever did, and she told me I had an eye for it. She died when I was 15, and left me $11,000 in a savings account. My parents suggested it go toward my brother's travel soccer fees. I said nothing. I opened my own account the following week. I paid for my own college applications. I got a partial scholarship to UT Austin for architecture and design, covered the rest with 3 part-time jobs, and a stubbornness that I had mistaken for resilience for a very long time. The night I got the acceptance email, I sat in my car in the parking lot of the grocery store where I worked and let myself cry for about 4 minutes. Then I went back inside and finished my shift. My parents took my brother to visit 4 different campuses that spring. They never asked to see mine. Austin suited me in a way Dallas never had. The city moved at a pace that felt like thinking unhurried, but always moving somewhere. I finished my degree in 3.5 years, took a junior position at a small residential firm, and spent my evenings building a portfolio of concepts I had no client for yet. My supervisor at the time, a woman named Donna who wore the same 2 blazers on rotation and knew more about light and proportion than anyone I've ever met, told me once that I designed like someone who understood longing. I asked her what she meant. She said some designers know what people want. The good ones know what people didn't know they were missing. I thought about that for years afterward. My brother called me on a Thursday evening in late October, 3 years after I'd left Dallas, to tell me he was engaged. I congratulated him warmly. Genuinely, I had nothing against his fiancée, who was pleasant and kind and had the good sense to seem slightly puzzled by my family's dynamics. The call lasted 6 minutes. Near the end, almost as if remembering something he'd left on the stove, he mentioned that the wedding would be in June, in Napa, at a vineyard, and that the guest list was around 200 people. I did the math before I'd even hung up. The formal ask came 3 weeks later. My mother called on a Sunday morning, which is how I knew it was something she'd been rehearsing. She led with how well I was doing, how proud they were, how my brother had always looked up to me even if he didn't always show it. Then she arrived at the destination she'd been driving toward the whole time. They were hoping I could contribute toward the wedding costs. Something significant, she said, because I was in a good place financially. $30,000. She said it the way people announce a figure they've already decided is reasonable. I sat with it for a moment. I had been saving that money for 18 months to lease a larger studio space, to bring on a second designer, to make the move I needed to make. I told her I'd think about it. She said, of course. Just let us know soon because we need to put deposits down. I didn't sleep well that week. Not because of the money, exactly. Because of what the ask revealed that after all this time, after the soccer cleats and the campus tours and the grandmother's inheritance that went to registration fees, The math had never actually changed. I was still the one with something to give, and no one keeping score on my behalf. I transferred $15,000, half of what they'd asked. I didn't explain why. I said it was what I could do. My mother said she understood. She did not sound like she understood. The engagement party was held at my parents' home in Dallas in early December. I drove up from Austin with a gift I'd spent 3 hours choosing and a dress I'd bought specifically because my mother had once mentioned, years ago, that she loved that color on me. I don't know what I was hoping for. Something small. Just a room where I existed at full volume for one evening. My brother had his crowd around him from the moment I walked in, old friends, fraternity brothers, people whose faces I half recognized from holiday photos over the years. I moved through the edges of it, spoke to my aunt, helped carry out a platter when the caterer looked overwhelmed. Around 9 o'clock, my father clinked a glass and made a toast. Warm and funny, the version of him I always wished was the everyday version. My mother went next, tears in her eyes, talking about watching her son grow into the man she always knew he'd be. I had prepared something short. Just a few sentences, a memory from when he was small, a genuine wish for his happiness. I stepped forward when the room quieted and someone handed me a glass. My brother looked at me from across the room and said, not quietly, "Can we not do this right now? This is supposed to be about us." A few people looked away. Someone laughed softly, the kind of laugh that's really just filling silence. My mother tilted her head at me the way she always had, the look that said, "You understand, don't you, sweetheart?" My father turned back to his drink. I set the glass down on the table beside me. I picked up my coat from the chair near the hallway. I didn't slam the door. I didn't say anything cutting or final or satisfying in the way those moments are satisfying in movies. I walked out to my car and sat in the dark for a while, and what I felt wasn't rage. It was the particular exhaustion of someone who has been waiting a very long time for a train that was never going to come to their station. I drove back to Austin that night. I did not cry this time. The following Monday, I gave my notice at the firm. I had been planning it for months. I just hadn't been planning to do it quite so Monday morning after a Sunday drive back from Dallas. But the timeline felt right in the way that things feel right when you've run out of reasons to wait. I opened my own studio that February. Mercer Interior Design, LLC. Out of a leased space in East Austin with high ceilings and a second-hand drafting table I'd found on Craigslist. I had 3 clients in the first month, 2 residential, 1 small restaurant remodel. I worked 18-hour days and ate a lot of granola bars and felt, for the first time in years, like I was building something with my actual hands. The big break came sideways, the way good things often do. A developer I'd done a small commercial project for recommended me to a contact of his who was opening a boutique hotel in San Antonio. Not a large property, 22 rooms, a rooftop bar, a restaurant that was supposed to feel like a living room. The kind of project that requires you to have an opinion about everything from the weight of the towels to the temperature of the ambient lighting. I had an opinion about all of it. The project took 14 months. When it opened, a travel writer from a national magazine described the interiors as the most considered hospitality space in Texas. The developer framed the review and mailed it to me with a handwritten note. I put it in a folder in my desk drawer and went back to work. That was when my business partner came into the picture. His name was Derek, and he was smart in the way that made you trust him before you should. He had connections, I didn't. Contractors, suppliers, a network of developers with deep pockets and ambitious projects. We formed a partnership, split the work evenly, or so I believed. I brought the vision, he brought the logistics. For 18 months, it seemed to work perfectly. The contract for the Beaumont collection came in the spring of our second year together. A regional luxury hotel brand, 6 properties across the South, a complete interior redesign from the ground up. It was the largest project either of us had ever touched. I spent 4 months on the concept package alone: color systems, material sourcing, lighting philosophy, the spatial language I wanted to run through all 6 properties to make them feel like siblings without being identical. I was prouder of that proposal than almost anything I'd made. Derek presented it. That was our arrangement. He handled the client-facing work. I handled the creative. I trusted the arrangement because I had built it, and because I didn't want to believe I'd built something that could be used against me. The Beaumont Collection awarded the contract to a firm in Nashville, a firm I'd never heard of. 3 weeks later, a designer friend sent me a link to their portfolio page, newly updated, featuring a hotel concept in photographs that used my color system, my spatial framework, my material language in details so specific, I felt the recognition like a physical thing in my chest. Derek had sold my concept. Not stolen in a dramatic sense, not a clean crime with clean edges, but sold, introduced, shared, passed along somewhere in the middle of a conversation I was never part of. The legal situation was complicated in the way these things always are. I had the drafts, the timelines, the dated files. What I didn't have, my attorney explained patiently, was a clear contractual trail that would make this easy or fast. I dissolved the partnership. I kept the studio, the clients, the reputation I'd spent 3 years building. What I lost was 2 years, and the version of myself that had believed a handshake agreement between people who respected each other was worth something in a room without witnesses. That winter, I did what I had done at 12 years old with my grandmother's inheritance, and at 22 with my college rejection tears, I found a new account and put the remaining money in it. Except this time the account was a one-way flight to New York and a sublet in Brooklyn with a radiator that clanked and a view of a wall. And the money I was banking on was the contact name in my notebook from a developer I'd met at a design conference in Houston the previous spring. He had given me his card and said, "Call me if you ever want to work bigger." I called. New York has a specific quality in January that I had not been prepared for. The cold is personal, somehow. It comes at you with intention. I walked from the subway every morning with my face turned sideways against the wind, past bodegas and scaffolding, and the particular smell of a city that doesn't apologize for being a city, and I thought, I am building the right room. I just haven't finished the walls yet. The developer's name was Marcus Webb, and he was, as promised, interested in bigger. He was in the middle of assembling a team for a flagship hotel project in Midtown, the kind of property that would anchor a full city block, 40 floors, a design brief that called for spaces where luxury felt inevitable rather than performed. He had looked at 6 firms. He wanted to meet with mine. I met with him twice. The second time, I brought 40 pages of concept work I had developed over 3 weeks of essentially no sleep. He read through it at the conference table while I sat across from him and looked at the skyline through the window behind him. And when he put it down, he said, "When can you start?" That was 3 years before the Penthouse. The Alderton, as the hotel came to be known, opened to the kind of coverage that circulates in industry circles for months. Architectural press, travel media, a profile in a design quarterly that described the project as a rare thing in contemporary hospitality, a building that knows exactly what it is. My name was in the article. My firm's name was in the article. I did not send it to my family. Not because I was hiding, because by then I understood that showing them had never been the point. The point had always been something I needed to give myself proof that the room I had always been building was real, was finished, was worth living in. The referrals that followed the Alderton changed the scale of everything. By the time I signed the lease on a proper studio in Tribeca and brought on 4 full-time designers, we had a wait list. Developers called us. Hotel groups sent proposals. I hired a director of operations so that I could stay where I did my best work, which was behind a drawing table with no meetings on the calendar before noon. My friend Priya, who had been my closest friend since Austin and had followed me to New York 2 years after I moved, liked to say that I had finally built a room with no ceiling. She said this sitting on the floor of my studio at 9 at night, both of us eating takeout from a place we had been ordering from so consistently, they knew our order before we finished saying it. I told her the metaphor was a little on the nose. She said I deserved something on the nose for once. The Whitmore Group reached out in early fall. They were a legacy hotel brand, old money, conservative aesthetic, 32 properties across the country, including a flagship in Manhattan that had been quietly losing cultural relevance for a decade. They wanted a redesign. Not a refresh, a rebuild of the entire experiential identity, from lobby to penthouse, through all 32 locations over 5 years. It was the kind of commission that changes what your firm is. We signed the contract in November. The announcement went out in the trade press the following week. I did an interview for a hospitality design publication, the first profile I had agreed to in 2 years, because the project was large enough that I couldn't manage the introduction quietly. The journalist asked about the origins of the firm. I gave her the honest version. Dallas, Austin, a dissolved partnership, a one-way flight. I didn't name anyone. I didn't need to. The piece ran the first week of January. By the second week, it had been picked up by a business news site with a readership that was not, primarily, interested in interior design. My phone rang on a Wednesday afternoon. A number I didn't recognize, but somehow, in the part of me that had been braced for this moment without knowing it, already knew. It was my brother. He didn't start with hello. He started with, "Is it true?" Like I owed him the confirmation before the greeting. I said yes and waited. There was a pause on his end. The kind that means someone is recalibrating something they thought they understood about the world. Then he said, "The Whitmore in Dallas, we had our rehearsal dinner there." I knew. I had seen the photos on my mother's Facebook 3 years ago. I had looked at them for a long time, those photos. The warm amber light in the private dining room, the way it fell across the table, the texture of the walls, the proportions of the space, all mine, down to the napkin rings. I said, "I know." Another silence. Then, "You could have told us." I let that sit for a moment. Then I said, "You told me to sit down and stop embarrassing myself." He didn't answer. I heard him breathe. "My firm designed 6 of the Whitmore properties before the new contract," I said. "The Dallas location, the one in New Orleans, the Houston property where you took your wife for your anniversary last spring. I saw the tag. He had posted about it on Instagram. A glass of wine by the window, the skyline behind it, the caption, 'Nothing beats this view.' The window treatment was my specification. The chair he was sitting in was a piece I had sourced from a manufacturer in Portugal after 3 rounds of sampling. I didn't tell him that part. Some things are complete enough without being said aloud. "I didn't know," he said finally. His voice had lost something, the casual assurance that had always been its baseline register, the tone of someone who had never had a real reason to doubt that the world was arranged in his favor. "I know you didn't," I said. And I meant it. That was the strange thing about the whole situation. The thing I had turned over many times in the months since the article circulated, and the dots began to connect publicly before I was ready for them to. I had never planned for this to be a reveal. I had simply built things, and put my name on them, and let the work exist in the world the way work is supposed to exist. It was only a reveal, because they had never been paying attention. The call with my mother came 2 days later. She had been working up to it. I could tell from the first syllable. She began by saying she had read the article. She said she was proud. She said it with the same careful warmth she used when she told me she understood about the $30,000, the warmth that was real but not quite deep enough to reach the thing it was supposed to cover. I thanked her. I meant it as much as I could. Then she said that my brother was having a difficult time. His real estate venture, a development project he'd launched with 2 college friends, had stalled badly. Financing had fallen through. He was overextended. She said it the way she had said everything about my brother my entire life, with a gravity that implied the rest of us were natural resources available for the emergency. I said I was sorry to hear it. She waited. I understood what she was waiting for. I had understood what people were waiting for from me since I was 12 years old. Clearing a path, filling a gap, being steady so that no one else had to be. I said, "I hope he finds the right support." Her voice shifted slightly. "He was hoping you might be able to give in everything." "Mom," I said, gently, "I love you. I'm not able to help with that." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "After everything the family has given you." I recognized the sentence. I had been waiting for it without knowing I was waiting for it, the way you recognize a song from the first 3 notes. I had heard it at the engagement party, standing at the edge of a toast I wasn't allowed to make. I had heard it in the tone of the call about the $30,000. I had heard it inside the phrase, "You're the steady one," which had always meant, "We need you to have no needs." The family gave me a drafting table that I bought myself and a room by the heating pipes, I said. Not harshly, just plainly, the way I would state any other fact. Everything after that I built. She didn't respond. A few seconds later, very quietly, She said goodbye and ended the call. I sat at the window of my office for a long time afterward. Outside, the city moved the way it always does, indifferent and alive. Trucks and taxis and the particular chorus of a place that has no pause button. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel grief either. Not really, that had dried up a long time ago, somewhere on a highway between Dallas and Austin on a December night, when I realized the train was never coming. What I felt was something closer to completion. Not happiness, exactly. Something stiller than happiness. The feeling of having set down a weight you carried so long you had stopped noticing it was there. Priya came by that evening with 2 bottles of wine and the kind of presence that doesn't require an explanation. She sat across from me on the velvet sofa she had insisted I buy when I moved into the new apartment, saying that a woman who designed spaces for other people ought to finally live in one she actually liked. She poured us each a glass and asked me how I was. I told her about the calls, both of them. She listened the way she always listened, fully, without filling the pauses with noise. When I finished, she said, "Do you feel anything about it?" I thought about that honestly. I feel like I finally answered a question I stopped needing answered. She nodded like she understood exactly what that meant. Maybe she did. Priya had her own version of this, a father who had been absent, then suddenly interested again once the press started, the particular arithmetic of people who appear when the math changes. We had talked about it enough over enough late evenings that we had developed a shorthand for it, the vocabulary of women who had learned to build their own foundations. The Penthouse contract had closed 3 weeks earlier. 28th floor of a building in Midtown that my firm had been commissioned to design from the ground up. Lobby, common spaces, all 42 residential floors, the full interior architecture. The unit on the 53rd floor had been reserved during construction for the lead designer on the project, a standard arrangement in high-end residential development that most people outside the industry don't know about. I had looked at it once during the construction phase, standing in the empty concrete shell with the city spread out through the frameless window opening, and thought, this is the room I have been building since I was 12 years old. Not the room itself, the fact of it. The fact of space that belonged entirely and only to me. I moved in on a Saturday in October with 4 boxes and a plant Priya had given me that she claimed was impossible to kill. The movers brought the furniture. I stood in the middle of the living room as the light shifted from afternoon to early evening, gold to amber, to the soft blue hour that exists for about 8 minutes before the city takes over with its own light. The floors were pale ash. The windows ran floor to ceiling on 2 sides. The kitchen had the counter depth I had specified and never been able to afford in any apartment I'd actually lived in. On the east-facing wall, just inside the entrance, I had hung a single framed piece, not art, not a photograph. A photocopy of the first sketch I had ever drawn of a space I wanted to live in, pulled from a notebook I had kept since I was 12, the paper soft and creased from being folded and unfolded many more times than I would admit. My brother sent a text the following week. Short, no punctuation. Congrats on the building. Heard it's impressive. I read it twice. Then I put the phone face down on the drafting table and went back to work on the concept package for a new project, a resort development in Montana, 400 acres, a design brief that asked for spaces that felt like they had always been there, like the land had grown them. I had a lot of thoughts about what that meant. I was already writing them down. There is a question I have been asked in every interview I have done since the Alderton piece, in different forms but always arriving at the same place. They want to know what drives me, what keeps me building. I have given several answers over the years, some more polished than others, but the honest one is the one I gave only once, to Priya, on the floor of that first studio in East Austin, eating granola bars at midnight with a deadline in the morning. I told her, when you grow up in a room that was built to minimize you, you spend the rest of your life understanding exactly what a room can do to a person. You understand proportion and light and how much a ceiling height can change the way someone feels about themselves before they've consciously noticed the ceiling. You understand that space is not neutral, that every room is an argument about who belongs in it and what they're worth. I build rooms where people feel like they belong, where the light falls on them correctly, where the proportions say, you are the right size for this place. Not because I am generous, because I spent 23 years in rooms that said the opposite, and I know exactly what that does. And I decided a long time ago that I would spend whatever time I had left making something different. That feels like enough. On most days, it feels like more than enough. The sun came up over the East River this morning and filled the apartment with the kind of light I would have specified for this room if I hadn't already. As it turns out, specified it. I made coffee and stood at the window and let it find me. Somewhere in Dallas, in a house with a heating pipe behind the wall of a small back bedroom, there is probably still a crack in the plaster. I hope whoever lives there now has fixed it. I hope they got the room with the east-facing windows. If you have ever been told to sit down in a room that was supposed to be yours, I want you to know something. The room isn't the point. The room was never the point. The point is what you do with everything they didn't know you were paying attention to. And when you finally build your own walls, build them with good light and high ceilings, the kind that make you feel exactly as large as you actually are, that is the only revenge worth having. Everything else is just gravity. Doing what gravity has always done, letting the weight fall exactly where it belongs.